Tell us about Keeper Stop. How did you make this thing happen? Because I just, I don't know, I couldn't respect you more for what you've been able to do for the goalkeeping community. Tell me about it, man.
Oh, well, I appreciate it because sometimes I question it every day. But you know, I just made a promise to myself in the 90s and 2000s. I was a marketing manager, project manager. I did sales worldwide for different startups, and I was compensated well. I traveled a lot. I played in Vermont during the winter times, in Newport, Rhode Island during the summers, and you know what? But I felt a little empty. There was something missing. So on my 30th birthday, I said, you know what? I want to work for myself. So on my 30th birthday, I bought the Keeper Stop URL. And this goes back to my first love of goalkeeping. And it was freshman year of high school. And I called up Adidas International with a roll of quarters that I borrowed from my stepfather's nightstand. And I put those quarters in the payphone, and I called them up. I wanted a jersey called the Montevideo jersey. Goicoechea wore it. And I wanted this jersey. It was amazing because I wanted to be a goalkeeper, and I wanted to look like a pro and play like a pro. That helps you along that path, right? Is like you look good, feel good, do good, right? One of a business mantra, an older one, but still it helps, right? You fake it till you make it. So anyways, I couldn't get the jersey. Like, nope, only available in Central America. And I was like, this is goalkeeping, I mean, you have Jorge Campos, you have the World Cup at that time, 1990 World Cup. And I was like, this is what goalkeeping is. It's fashion. And so that 1990 phone call with $3 in quarters to Adidas International. Now, fast forward that to 30 years old. I just said, I love soccer. I love goalkeeping. I was in Boston at that time working for a variety of companies. And I just said, I'm going to start this here. And I always coached. I always, was involved in the educational side, even regardless of what I was doing as a project manager. I mean, I was involved in the first chasesmallbusiness.com. I built that with the company I was with. First product launches online for LASIK eye surgery and Gillette, and there was some. It was the sky was limitless as far as the opportunities. I just didn't feel like I was fully satisfied. I wanted to be more responsible for my destiny, but also more importantly too, because I made a hell of a lot more money then, and I missed that. But I didn't feel fulfilled because in the event that I ever left the world like that, I felt like I wasn't making a difference. And because of the support or the lack of support that I had, but the love I had for sports and competition, I always wanted to make the environment that I was involved in better for kids like myself that didn't have the money or didn't have the education because of lack of money or lack of opportunity. So, I mean, that was the premise of Keeper Stop. It was started 20 years ago to supply a need of goalkeeper equipment and education. It's definitely been more of a slow grow, slow burn type of situation, but I've always wanted to do it right, organically, that every order, every interaction, every phone call makes a difference because you know what? There could be an opportunity like I had that turns my one experience in soccer and goalkeeping into something much bigger. It's like I don't remember his full name, but all of a sudden, because of athleticism, I made the varsity team as a freshman. And I could barely touch a crossbar, but I was fearless. I was fast. I was athletic. And I started as a freshman. And this one coach is Coach Hogan. He was the gym teacher for Lewis Mills. And he was the first one that was like, you know what? I see you want this. And he was an old school goalkeeper coach or an old school coach. And he'd literally line up, like 20 balls, and you would jump on these balls 20 in a row, and you'd be dead and you'd have to be peeled off. But you know what? That was the first coach that said, other than being paid to go to, Tony DeChico's camp that one year or whatever. But that was the first coach, other than my stepfather at the time, that took me aside, said, "Hey, I want to make you better. I believe in you." And that matters to a kid, and that is one episode of many, or one situation of many, that has allowed me to be where I am today, because this one person believed in me, and I didn't have a great home environment at that time. There was a lot going on, and sports was my outlet, right? It kept me going to school. It kept my grades very good. It kept me tuned in, and it helped, kind of filter out the other distractions. So fast forward that, I took those successes and that emotion and that passion and challenge, right? And there's good and bad in challenge, right? You're successful, you're not, you're unsuccessful. But I think goalkeepers are a little bit different. You're probably the same. It's like, I don't shy away from conflict or challenge, because it's akin to jumping on a ball while a striker's trying to kick it. Who does that? Who puts her face 3 inches away from a striker's foot? So anyways, I take that same passion, that same conviction from playing, being a goalkeeper, being an athlete, into the business world.
Let's talk about U.S. soccer. Where would you like to see U.S. soccer go next?
Hmm. Let's answer that question in 1 second. But I want to get back to, it's like, yes, our partners are important, but I want to get back to, I think, the whole, this,
Yeah,
the ups and downs. I think that's what, you're an entrepreneur, right?
of
You're
course.
an M&A attorney. You have multiple businesses and business interests. I'm an entrepreneur, and I think there are some very important parallels to that. It's like we don't shy away from risk. We're risk takers, but they're calculated risks. We enjoy the process. We enjoy the training, and that's what I think makes us very good entrepreneurs and business professionals, is because we're able to assess risk very quickly, make decisive decisions, but also within those, I'm not going to call them highs and lows, but I'm saying, but areas of equilibrium, and then, decisiveness, we're able to also train ourselves and enjoy the process and get better. So maybe some of that is normalized. And I think there's a direct link to athletes and that normalization of pressure, stress, aka decisions, aka risk, financial investment, gut feeling. It all ties into the same passion and the same outcome.
Have you ever lived this way yourself for a period of time? And if so, what was that like for you?
It's hard. So it seems that for me, as an individual and as a business owner, I do much better in high intensity environments. That I have two speeds. It's all or none, right? And I think that it's part of us, or part, I'll just say me, my therapy session is that I enjoy the adrenaline rush. I won't say high. I enjoy the adrenaline rush that we get from being in a fast-paced environment, being in an exciting environment where there's lots of things going on and decisions. So I think that's part of what gets us going and keeps us going. I don't mind being at this level, but this is like checking emails, you know, and then everything else is like, all right, it's on. I mean,
Yeah.
even in this conversation right now, I mean, it's like I'm jazzed up talking about it. My synapses are firing because, this is an opportunity for us and for me to share my ideas and viewpoints. And I'm thinking of like, who can I help make a difference in, whether it be a young professional that wants to be an entrepreneur, or, maybe a successful business owner that sees potential in their young athlete, son or daughter, that shares similar characteristics.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's really the entire point of these short form creations, is to connect the dots between a childhood growing up in the game and then becoming a professional. And your professional happens to be an entrepreneur that somehow found a Venn diagram of goalkeeping to the entrepreneurship itself, which is unbelievable. But having lived it all yourself and now being where you are, seeing where society is heading, what would you say to a young person? What advice would you impart on them so that they could maybe learn from your journey?
So here's what I'll say to any young person or anybody, whether it's younger than me at 49, is like, you have one life, and tomorrow's not guaranteed. And this sounds morbid, but it's not. Time is your biggest commodity that you have and you can share. Excuse me. But with that, you want to do something in your life that you enjoy. And that is very altruistic, but at the same time, I mean, can you figure out a way that you can combine your personal interests and make money from it? And I'm always going to suggest somebody to explore your entrepreneurial roots, or just, and entrepreneurial means, it doesn't mean that you have to risk everything and risk your mortgage on your business. It could be that you have a 9 to 5 job, but what else do you enjoy? Is there something else there that maybe it's making beaded necklaces, because I just bought some for my kids to make for Mother's Day, for Valentine's Day, for their mother. But it could be, arts and crafts at home. It could be like us when I was younger, even though I held 9 to 5 jobs, whether it be inside sales for mutual fund companies or developing 7-figure websites for the biggest banks in the world. I always coach on the side, whether it be for my own mental health or for my wallet. So you have to find outlets, and you have to find additional revenue if you need it, right? So I'm always going to encourage somebody to be an entrepreneur, to think of ways to how to expand their own offering and their own what am I trying to say? Their own network is a good way to expand their own network. You and I would have never met, right, if it wasn't for goalkeeping. And I'm fortunate that you and I are friends now, and I'm fortunate for a lot of the friends that I've made that I never would have met if I just stayed as a project manager or a marketing manager for a web development company. So being an entrepreneur and exploring these creative outlets, it can learn to different ways of paying yourself, and that could be an enjoyment or monetarily. And I just knew that I was unhappy at 30 years old. I was spending a lot, not getting a lot of, I was doing a lot of things for short-term satisfaction without long-term real satisfaction. So at 30, I gave up corporate America and I coached, substitute taught, and I started Keeper Stop. And early on, it was 10 orders a week, or maybe 3 orders. I was one of the first ones to truly do it in my space or our space. Did whatever I had to do to make sure that Keeper Stop was continuing to grow. So I wore many different hats, and I was used to doing that, but just one of those hats I made exponentially more.
Yeah.
And now it was a bunch of things to make a living. And I had an important conversation with some coaches. Dane Gaspar was one of them, and this was 20 years ago now when I first started Keeper Stop. And they're like, what do you want to do? I was a camp director, at 30 years old, and loved it. And, it was a fun way, an exciting way. I was in great shape in the sun during the summertime, but it's not a long-term living. You got to figure out other ways to make a living. And having a conversation with people around you, my mentors, people I really trusted and appreciated, that's when Keeper Stop really started to take on, the shape that it is now, and have the support and the dedication that it needed from me, because I was like, okay, corporate America is done. I'm done with that. I want to do something that makes a difference. So I had to figure out, how can I support my lifestyle, eventually be married. I met my wife at that time, was my girlfriend, have children, but yes, stay involved in the game of soccer. And so I enjoyed coaching, still coached, still made money from that, still gave back in that perspective for free or for money. But that's when I started Keeper Stop, saying I enjoy coaching, but I need to have a consistent living. So recognizing what my passion and what really lit my fire, but then also, with a need. I knew that the fashion side of goalkeeping and the educational side of goalkeeping is so fragmented and wasn't truly developed then, really isn't now either. And so that was the genesis of Keeper Stop, seeing the need, fueling my passion and my drive, fighting those battles and making sure you do everything underneath it to push it, your drive, your passion, as well as pay for your existence, right? And too many small business owners just say, we're going to do this, but why are you going to do it? Right? It's just like, do you have the means to support yourself? Is there truly a need in the market? I just think there's a lot of things you have to think about, and you got to be willing to make some sacrifices